It's been about 20 years or so since I last played bass in a band live, and somehow I found myself back on the low end again after all this time. I did volunteer for it. What exactly did I get myself into? Now, I consider myself a guitarist first, but I'm also a singer, and I dabble in a lot of different instruments. I play everything on my own music, all the instruments, and do all the singing. Now, about 20 years ago, I played bass in a Tool tribute band. So, kind of a technical kind of thing. Not exactly the easiest bass parts to play. So it was a lot of fun. But now, after playing guitar in cover bands for the last 15 years or so, with constant live gigs, traveling all over the Western United States, this is the first time I've been a bassist in someone else's original band. So let's talk about what I've learned and what I've relearned along the way of this journey. And spoiler alert, I think it'll make you a better guitarist and a better overall musician if you pick up the bass every once in a while. So the first thing is, playing bass is an entirely different role in the band. As a guitarist, you're out front, people are looking at you, watching your fingers fly. On bass, you're basically invisible to a lot of people. But you have an even more critical role in the band than the guitarist does. You give the songs the feel, the groove, all that stuff that it needs in order for the crowd to start dancing and feeling the music. So if your feel is even a little bit off, everybody notices. They may not know it's you that screwed up, but you are essentially the foundation of the songs. Bass is very much overlooked, but the vibe will really suck all night without you filling that role. Now, I'm not gonna lie, coming from a lead role essentially to a background role, as a lot of people would call it, it's a little bit of an ego trip. It is, especially the first time I did it. You go from being out front, everybody's paying attention, to kind of being sort of invisible, especially if the PA isn't very good. So it can kind of mess with your ego a little bit. Everybody's looking at the singer, everybody's looking at the guitar player. They're kind of barely noticing you in a lot of cases. But that's what you need to learn to let go of. It's about making the band and the music feel really good. And that can be very satisfying, especially if you really dig into that role and just sink yourself deep into that feel and that groove. But honestly, despite all that ego stuff, it's a lot of fun. You get to sit back, lock in with the drummer, help drive the groove of the song, make the crowd feel the song. There's a lot of freedom in it. And doing this, playing this different role, it really does force you to be a better musician, especially if you're coming from that lead role, like I said, of being out front, a lead guitarist or lead singing. My rhythm and timing have to be a lot sharper on bass. My ear for feel has to be a lot better. And when I go back to the guitar, suddenly I understand all these foundations and the pocket much differently. It's kind of like you get leveled up without even meaning to. So when I write my own songs now, a lot of times the bass part is one of the first things that I write, maybe along with the drum part, because it's so critical to how the song feels and the way that the movement of the root notes and the chords, and it all weaves through the structure of the song. A lot of people, especially, on the more amateur side, if they're just kind of dabbling in bass, they'll write all the chords out, write all the singing and everything, and then just kind of hit a bunch of root notes on the bass and call it done, right? But there really is a special art to bass parts, and I kind of feel lucky to have gotten to learn more about it over the years. I'm no James Jamerson or Carol Kay or anything, but when I hear those people on a track now, I go, what was that? I mean, it's just mind-blowing stuff sometimes. If you just dial in, pay attention, and really see what they're doing to create that groove. I mean, if you have a chance to hear some of those classic songs, or even just songs that you really love that have great bass playing on them, sometimes you can isolate just the drums and bass, and the song is just grooving so hard before anything else even gets added to it. Coming from a guitar player standpoint, right, we have a tendency to overplay a lot. And sometimes when we get on bass too, we want to overplay. But the reality is, if you hear that groove, you feel that groove, your guitar parts are going to be a lot better because you'll be able to weave in and out of what they're doing. Or if it's you playing all the parts, you'll be able to layer things without getting in your own way or just leaving the bass to be simple root notes, right? So getting that informed decision and that that feel down, it just creates so much more depth to how you see music. And yeah, in all seriousness, after playing for a number of years in the Tool band, even though that's a more technical, progressive rock, hard rock kind of thing, coming back to playing things like funk or pop music or even classic rock, I found myself on the guitar, my rhythm playing, I was so much more locked in with what the drummer and bass player were doing, right? I was trying really hard to make my parts groove and looking for that pocket. Whereas before I was just kind of, riffing and soloing and just kind of being a typical guitar player, if you know what I mean. So let's talk about some of the physical realities of switching to an instrument like this, right? What it does to your hands and fingers. It's a totally different ball game. In this band, I'm actually on a 5-string, which is new to me. And the neck is wider than anything I'm really used to. And the stretches sometimes on these songs are really brutal. Like my hand is just in pain, my fingers, my wrists, everything. And the funny part is when you go back and pick up a guitar, you find yourself bending like 3 whole steps up or something because it just feels like nothing. And after that, your fingers and your hands get so much stronger. There is that added strange benefit that kind of turns you into Superman with ultra strength grip on the guitar afterwards. And also it makes, you start to build up even tougher calluses and things because the strings are so much bigger. And especially if you're playing on round wounds on the bass, it feels like basically like if getting calluses on the guitar is like hitting like 400 grit sandpaper, bass strings are like 80 grit sandpaper. So guitar is honestly a piece of cake after you're playing on that, it's way less brutal. So, a strained advantage, I'll admit, but there's some other challenges that you may not even think about until you're really in that groove. Like suddenly you feel totally responsible for helping drive the feel of the whole band. Realizing how much pressure is on your right hand, especially to keep everything steady. Especially if you're playing with your fingers, it's like, doot, 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 you're not even. All of a sudden, the whole vibe of the whole song gets thrown off, right? It's a real trip. A lot of times people think the drummer is the one that's determining the feel of songs, but the drummer is mainly kind of keeping the time and the rhythmic feel. And the bass is giving you, at the same time, it can be melodic, harmonic, rhythmic feel all at once. It really, without the bass, there is almost no feel to a lot of songs. It's a very critical role that most people it's an afterthought. Oh, you don't know how to play guitar, just play bass. It's only one note at a time, right? Well, that's not really reality at all. But I mean, if you think about it, how many great songs are really just drums and bass and the vocals over top of it, right? So the drums and bass are such a critical role to play in each song. I mean, of course you can have songs without them, but being in that kind of a critical role takes your guitar playing to such a higher level afterwards because you don't have to be playing all the time, right? Or you can change up your rhythm to accentuate what the bass and drums are doing. You can just bring so much more depth to your guitar playing once you really live in another instrument's shoes, I think. So if you get the chance or you get offered to play bass for a band, you might want to consider it. If you have the means to get a bass and you're interested, I would take it seriously. Don't be just a guitar player playing bass or bump, 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 hitting root notes all the time. Take it seriously, get the groove down, and really feel music in a way that you may not have felt before. At times it can feel a little weird. You might get a little imposter syndrome when you're out there playing an instrument that's outside your normal one that, you're usually playing. So at the end of the day, why would you want to do this? Why would you want to take a gig away from a bass player, other than the fact that bass players are really hard to find? So, sometimes us guitarists do need to play that role and fill in because there just aren't enough bass players to go around. Sad but true, right? Well, saying yes to a role like this keeps you sharp. It forces you to grow in new ways, and it reminds you why playing music is fun in the first place. We can get really stuck in ruts or in patterns on guitar, and, just because you take on a gig on bass doesn't mean you're now a bass player forever either. But you may end up doing new things on the guitar after being on bass that break you out of those old ruts, right? Those things that are just getting you stuck. Like I said before, you'll come out a better musician, a better guitarist on the other end of this. There's so many dimensions that you can add to your playing by picking up different instruments. You don't necessarily have to go whole hog and join a band on bass, but, picking up a bass every once in a while and really getting into it and learning some bass parts and the ins and outs of what makes a great bass part can really add a lot to your playing. Give it a try. Can't hurt, can it? As always, if you liked what you heard, feel free to give me a thumbs up down below. And if you want to hear more from me in the future, be sure to subscribe. You can leave me a comment below if you like what I had to say or don't like what I had to say. Maybe I'm stealing all the gigs from bass players out there. Let me know. So other than that, I'll see y'all later.